Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching the Deist Religion channel. I'm your host, Simon Laird. Today, I'm going to be reacting to an article from First Things, which is one of the leading Christian intellectual websites. So this essay is called The Mixed Message of Anora by Mary Rose Somariba. Screenwriter and director Sean Baker's Anora won 4 Oscars at the 2025 Academy Awards, including Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Motion Picture. Baker has been known to showcase marginalized and outcast communities in his work, and in Anora, he turns his focus to women in strip clubs and prostitution. The commercial sex industry is indeed a marginalized group, but its marginalization is the direct consequence of the nature of its trade. Those in the sex industry are often victims of abuse and human trafficking. Their express purpose is to become objects for the consumer. And yet, in his acceptance speech for screenwriting, Baker made a point to legitimize sex work. I want to thank the sex worker community. They have shared their stories, they have shared their life experience with me over the years. My deepest respect, I share this with you. That's what he said. Much of Anora is softcore porn. Their protagonist, Anora, or Annie, played by Mickey Madison, works at a strip club called Headquarters, and right off the bat, the film features sexualized imagery of topless women writhing on male buyers. Vanya, the son of a Russian oligarch, becomes enamored by Anora and flies her to Vegas, where they marry. When his family finds out and sends henchmen, including a man named Igor, to New York to force Vanya to annul the marriage, a wild goose chase ensues. Given the gratuitous objectification of women, I cannot recommend the movie, but Anora is one of those films with a twist at the end, a twist that almost saves the movie from itself. After Vanya relents to family pressure and abandons Anora, she is alone with Igor, who recognizes all she's suffered and makes a gesture of unselfish love. She breaks down in tears at the realization that real intimacy is more powerful than lustful sex, and the movie ends. As such, Anora delivers a gut-wrenching punch to the using people as objects lifestyle. And yet, it's a punch that the film director and even the lead actress forget, and it's a shame that viewers have to endure so much pornographic content to find the kernel of value. Okay, so right away, we already see a lot of themes that you see in Christian intellectual circles, because among Christian intellectuals believe that no woman is ever responsible for her actions. That's not a straw man. For example, Douglas Wilson, who's one of the most popular evangelical writers, explicitly says this. I would have to go back and find the essay, but he explicitly says that since women are supposed to obey men, that means that no woman could ever do anything that she should be responsible for, and it's always the fault of the man who she was following. And we see the same kind of attitude in this essay, maybe in a less explicit form, but she's talking about, the first thing she says about so-called sex work is that the people in the industry are often victims of abuse and human trafficking, which is certainly true. There is a lot of that. But not all of them are. And, some women want to do that because they want the money. And some of them... And also, the idea with so-called sex work, a lot of it is about trying to extract as much money from the male buyers as possible. The women in that are really predatory. They're trying to exploit those men. Obviously, the men are complicit in it as well. But there are some women who I think like the power. I think they like the idea that they can seductively extract money from the men, especially if they don't have to fully have sex with the men. I think that makes them feel even more powerful. And that would be the case in strip clubs, I would imagine. So again, obviously, yeah, there is human trafficking as well, and that's horrible, and the men are complicit in this. But the women have some complicity as well. They have some responsibility as well. And we see the same thing with, what's the word they use? Objectification. She complains about the gratuitous objectification of women in the movie through the sexually explicit scenes, presumably. Ayn Rand said about the term sexual objectification that to be objectified is just to be an object of desire. And so, with that definition, everyone should be sexually objectified. Everyone should be objectified and want to be objectified by somebody. So that's maybe a different use of the word objectified than most people have in mind, but this is sort of that's the problem with the term. The term objectification should not exist because some people use it to mean being the object of desire, like Ayn Rand did. But some people, I think, use it to refer to an inanimate object, treating someone as if they're just an inanimate object and not a person. And so the term could mean two totally different things. It's just not helpful. It doesn't clarify anything. It's not precise to use the term sexual objectification. And I think that in practice, when people say sexual objectification, it's just like they're just like throwing a bomb into the conversation and then leaving. They want to throw out something that sounds really bad, but not actually explain what it is. It's a form of imprecise, sloppy rhetoric at the least, and I think kind of dishonest rhetoric in most cases. So we heard that Igor, after Vanya relents to family pressure and abandons Enora, she is alone with Igor, who recognizes all she's suffered and makes a gesture of unselfish love. She breaks down in tears at the realization that real intimacy is more powerful than lustful sex. I'm not sure exactly what... I'm not sure why lustful sex would necessarily be not intimate. I'm not sure why lustful sex would necessarily be not intimate, but that's what this author seems to think. As such, Enora delivers a gut-wrenching punch to the using people as objects lifestyle. Again, though, this is... Yeah, certainly they're absolutely in so-called sex work. There's a lot of using people as objects. That's a lot of what the men want to do, and it's what the women want to do when they're extracting money from the men. But is it really... I mean, again, she's presumably using the word object to refer to inanimate objects. But also, it's not necessarily always wrong to use people as objects. To take just another example, this is from Douglas Wilson again. If there's a if you're at a party outside, and there's a tall person next to you, if you want to get out of the sun, so you lean into the shadow of the tall person, are you objectifying them? Well, in a sense you are, because you're using them as an object. You're using the tall person as a sun blocker. But there's obviously nothing morally wrong with that, because you're not telling that person that they're only a sun blocker. You're not saying that, you're not forcing them to stand in the same place so that they have to be a sun blocker for you. And Douglas Wilson would say that the real issue arises only when you start using someone for something contrary to their proper purpose. Now, that requires you to believe a lot of Christian natural law suppositions about what a person's proper purpose is. But, every time if you go to the baker and buy some bread, if you don't have a personal relationship with the baker, you're using the baker as an object. You're using them as a bread dispenser. Now, you're also paying for the bread, so you're affirming their interest as well. But in the so-called sex work industry, again, the prostitutes are being paid as well, so it's not like they're being enslaved. They're receiving a payment for their services, which means that their interests are being taken into account. It's a voluntary transaction. And so just summing up the problem as using people as objects, that's not really a correct explanation of the problem, because it doesn't explain why sex work is wrong in a way that going to and buying bread from the baker is not wrong. The real problem with so-called sex work, I mean, this would be a big conversation, but part of the problem has to just be that it is crass and wrong, and there just are different rules for sex than for other things. And I think that if some people want to be sophisticated and explain the wrongness of sexual sins in the same kind of vocabulary as the wrongness of other sins. But sex actually is a special category. And maybe on the deepest philosophical level, you can work out general principles to explain both sexual sins and other sins. But in common parlance, there just are different standards for sexual behavior than other behavior, and everyone knows it. And I think we should be less shy about just stating that. Sex work is disgusting, it's degenerate, And maybe there's something about using people as objects as well, but saying it's disgusting and degenerate should be the primary argument. So they say, and yet it's a punch that as such, Honora delivers a gut-wrenching punch to the using people as objects lifestyle, and yet it's a punch that the film director and even the lead actress forget, and it's a shame that viewers have to endure so much pornographic content to find the kernel of value. Accepting her award for Best Actress, Madison said, "I just want to recognize and honor the sex worker community. Yes, I will continue to support and be an ally, and all of the incredible people, the women that I've had the privilege of meeting from that community, has been one of the highlights of this incredible experience." While Baker and Madison may have been attempting to lift up the outcasts of the sex industry in offering pro-quote sex work comments, true support for those in the sex industry looks different. To do right by those in the sex industry, we should take care to acknowledge the abuse and coercion therein, not participate in the fantasy that it's a harmless, free choice for women to sell sex. Again, this is making the women involved to be the real victims, and there's no talk about their complicity and their culpability at all. Viewers aren't privy to what led Honora to the sex industry, but to be in one's early 20s as a seasoned lap dancer with no apparent family, there's a lot going untold. Of the women I've spoken with who have left stripping and prostitution, okay, great. Many first make their debut in the commercial sex industry before the age of 18, which in the United States constitutes sex trafficking. Many were also, so again, human trafficking often refers to slavery, like literally someone is tied up and kidnapped and taken somewhere and then forced to do something against their will. And here, this author in First Things is using the word trafficking to refer to a 17-year-old deciding to be a stripper. I mean, there's a huge difference of degree there. I think it's kind of insulting to real victims of slavery to put their experience in the same category as a 17-year-old making an immoral choice. Many were also lured into it by boyfriends turned pimps. Okay, so the boyfriends are the real villains here. These women don't keep the money they make selling their bodies, and after they've left the industry, I'd like to see. I suspect they keep some of it. I'd like to see the facts on that. And after they've left the industry, research shows nearly 90% want to get out and have recovered from the trauma. Many don't appreciate being called sex workers. Okay, so we're not allowed to call them what they are either. As Melissa Farley, head of the research powerhouse Prostitution Research and Education, told me, while people think it lends dignity to women who do it, the term sex worker turns a violation against women into employment. As Farley puts it, you don't have to identify a person by what is done to her. So it's done to them rather than something they chose to do. I see. So much of the thinking around prostitution is marketing-driven, Farley says. Above all, prostitution and trafficking is about marketing and having a good time and making money. This image is all a lie, but it's good for business. So is that the image that's marketed to the prostitutes? It's about having a good time and making money? Okay, so they hear that marketing and that makes them want to become prostitutes. And then they end up regretting it later. The hard truth. Sexualized media increases demand for sex trafficking. Truly honoring the women in the sex industry doesn't equate to affirming the poorly termed sex worker community. If that were the case, we'd be trying to send them... Truly honoring the women in the sex industry doesn't equate to affirming the poorly termed sex worker community. If that were the case, we'd be trying to send them more business, pushing more sex buyers their way, treating them as endlessly usable objects, but we're not. And the film doesn't seem to be advocating for that either. Honora comes close to recognizing the exploitation at the core of the, quote, industry. It's a pity its creators do not. Okay, so we hear this all the time when Christian intellectuals talk about whoring, about prostitution. They don't like the term sex worker, but they don't like the term whore either. They want to use a more sophisticated vocabulary. They also use the word exploitation. Exploitation is a weasel word. Exploitation it doesn't have any real meaning. It's just something that people say when they want to make something sound bad without making a real argument. It's like when communists say that employment is exploitation because someone's being paid for their work. It's if they if they say what's actually happening, that there's just someone doing a job and they're being paid for it, that doesn't sound very bad. So communists have to use the weasel word exploitation to make it sound like there's this scary thing going on. You hear the same thing about exploiting the natural environment or exploiting natural resources. The word exploitation literally just means using. So using natural resources doesn't sound bad, but people who have an agenda to push want to say exploiting natural resources because that sounds scarier. And here they use the word exploitation for what whores do, because they want to remove the agency of the whores. And again, before you say it, yes, of course, there are some people who are trafficked, who are enslaved, and that's horrible. But it's not all of them, and there is a real willingness on the part of some women to become whores because they want money and they want the feeling of power, and they think it's an easy way to make money. It's easy, it's more fun than working in a factory. To ignore, there are temptations that women have. For some women, living the life of a courtesan and being highly paid to be sexy is a temptation. And Christian intellectuals just deny that. They deny the facts about human nature. Okay, that's the end of the article. I hope you liked this episode. I'll be back again next week. Thanks for watching.